Hi there, I'm Morella DeVoe. I'm going to share with you a deeply personal story. It's something I didn't talk about for many years. Now, this story is probably not super appropriate for little kids, so if you have little ones around, you may want to plug in your headsets as you're listening to this, or maybe pause the video and watch it later. It's not, anything super inappropriate, but it just might be best if you listen by yourself. So, the reason why I'm sharing this story is because most of us, if not all of us, are carrying wounds from the past. They may be things from our childhood or early adulthood or even more recent. And they're things that carry a lot of heaviness and difficult emotions. They can be really painful, and they can take their toll. They can take their toll on our health and on our relationships and our overall happiness. So I want to share my story with you so that you can see how deeply it can affect someone, and especially because there can be a happy ending. And so that's why I want to share it with you. Obviously, I'm sharing because this is something that I've been able to work through. And I would want that for you if you're dealing with your own heaviness, your own wound from the past, your own pain that you haven't been able to overcome. So my story is that I was date raped in college. I had too much to drink one night, way too much to drink. And this guy that I had just been kind of lightly dating, we weren't really in a relationship. Well, he was that kind of guy who might take advantage of a girl being drunk. So I was wasted, and it happened. And I wasn't so wasted that I was totally unconscious, but it was enough that it was completely non-consensual. And in the days that followed, I felt horrible. And then, of course, there was no relationship there, right? So, for the better part of 10 years, I tried to pretend that it had never happened, that it didn't matter in my life, that it was no big deal. I didn't talk about it. I didn't share it with anyone. And it was only about 10 years later, I was in Arizona, in the desert in Arizona, at a retreat, that I started realizing this is what happened. This did happen. This is what it was. And it turns out that this has had some major consequences in my life. It started to dawn on me that since that happened, my health started to go downhill. I had never had a skin problem, and all of a sudden in college I started developing cystic acne. It started with, some little pimples here and there, and then it went downhill, and over the course of 10 years it got worse and worse and worse, and it was cystic acne full blown on my face. And I had been trying everything. Nothing was really working. I went to nutrition school, and when I started detoxifying my body, it started improving a little bit, but it wasn't fully gone. It wasn't fully resolved. I also had hormone issues, what have you. So these deep wounds can have a physical effect, and of course they have their emotional toll. So for the better part, for a decade, I was dragging this pain, this wound of being violated, disrespected, and the deep shame also that accompanies that. Having that sort of experience. Any woman who's gone through that knows that there's a shame, even though most people would say you shouldn't feel ashamed, you didn't do anything. There's inevitably there's shame associated with that. So at this retreat, I started doing this one process and this one writing exercise that was part of the retreat, but then I kind of modified it. It was the first time that I was able to start turning around the pain of the event, and I started feeling better, and I was able to start talking about it. And shortly afterwards, I started my own private practice and coaching, and it was actually something that a part of the story no longer owned me, and I was able to talk about it. I felt, somewhat healed from it, and it was, I was a little bit more whole. But then another 10 years later, which was only about 2 years ago, I realized there was another layer. And it was that deep shame that I hadn't actually fully healed and I hadn't come to terms with. And there was another part of that story that I hadn't yet really been able to share. I was able to share, a portion of it, but then there was another part of it that I couldn't really talk about. And I hadn't told a soul. So it was 20 years after the fact. And this event was still having a toll in my life and in my emotional health. And it just so happened that when I had this massive realization, just the prior week, I had been sitting in meditation and I had been writing, and all of a sudden I found myself writing a series of processes and exercises and things that I had been using with my clients over the past 10 years, having studied counseling and then hypnosis and neurolinguistic programming, all of these different tools. I had started developing these different techniques and ways of helping my clients. And I wrote this whole list of processes. And when I was done writing it, all of a sudden I realized it was kind of a sequence. And the words that floated through my mind were, this is a 3-day retreat. And all of a sudden I was looking at this and realizing, oh my gosh, I never planned to do this. But this is a wound healing process. So flash forward again to that moment where I realized, holy smokes, I'm still carrying this deep pain and this deep shame, and I haven't healed from this. So I decided to take myself through that process. I said, well, I have to see if this works. So I walked myself over the course of a week through all of the exercises and all of the processes in this sequence, and I was blown away. By the end of the week, I felt like a radically shifted woman. I just felt like this story really no longer had any hold on me. And so the next day I told my husband about it. I shared with him the whole story, that I had not spoken fully to a human being in 20 years. And I told my sister, I called her and I sat and then went to see her and I sat with her and I told her the story as well. And so for the first time in 20 years, I was feeling I'm whole. I'm feeling healed from this. I feel like the story no longer has any grip on me. And so I'm sharing this with you because I know somebody's going to watch this. Maybe you are watching this and you know that there is something that you went through that is still holding on to you, that you haven't yet overcome, that you haven't yet healed from, that you are not yet feeling whole from, and that it has a greater bearing on your life than you would like. I went 10 years not speaking this guy's name because I didn't want him to have such an effect on my life. I wanted to pretend that it had never happened and it had no bearing on my life. But that pretending like it never happened doesn't solve it. Not talking about it doesn't solve it. And so I want to share this with you because I've taken this whole process, and this is the retreat that I've been facilitating now for a couple of years. It's the work that I've been taking my clients through now for the past couple of years, and it is powerful. And so if you're feeling ready to look into what it might be like for you to completely and finally let go of this wound and this story in your life, I really want you to join me. Within a few days, you can be at a completely different place in your life. And so check out the retreat and see if it's time for you now to resolve this and become whole again and heal your heart completely. It's possible, and it doesn't have to take another 10 years. So I hope you'll join me if it's the right time.